Good afternoon and welcome back to the Worthy for 30 podcast. I'm your host, Eric Tash, and I'm elated to introduce my next guest, someone I've known for, 34, 35 years. B.A. Van Cise, a proud Baldwinite like myself, Baldwin High School. If you look at Baldwin history, you have Dee Snider, B.A. Van Cise, Scott Rudin. I don't think people want to be associated with him, but anyway, B.A., welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to come and do this. It's kind of funny. It's been a weird and busy week for me, but as you're saying, it's not quite as long as you think it is. But fundamentally, it's been 30 years. We were little kids together, and it's strange to see all the different ways that life can take people and the different paths that we all end up having. So it's kind of fun to reunite. I don't think you and I have seen each other in almost 20 years, maybe a little more than 20 years. So we were joking before we came on the podcast that we've changed a little bit. We're exactly as young as when last we met, and our facial hair has also changed a little bit. So
we're age is just a number. We're still as youthful and vivacious as we were when we were kids. Have a joie de vivre for life.
There's a funny thing about that actually. So I've been having some conversations. And you're absolutely positively under no circumstances allowed to discuss an exhibition that is going to come out before the museum announces it. So I'm not talking about an exhibition that's coming together in Kansas City. But I was having some meetings about it this morning, and we're talking about different survivors that I might want to bring out because it's about Invited to Life. And I mentioned this survivor who I particularly have deeply, warm feelings about, and I said, he's 90, but he feels younger than you because he does, and that's a big part of it. The energy you carry around in the world makes a big difference.
Yeah, it absolutely does. As I like to say, you can't get your highs too high or your lows too low. I was trying to keep stasis as much as possible throughout your day, despite what gets thrown at you. We were talking before we started recording. You go on social media, it's like, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. But when we get our bearings, when we get our druthers, we can really look and grasp on what we're grateful for. And it's, again, having this opportunity to, yes, we haven't seen each other, but we follow each other on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been keeping tabs on what BA has been doing, both as a photojournalist as well as an author. And before we get to, the book that is coming out tomorrow, would love for you to tell both myself and the audience, again, knowing you, up until high school, or seeing you every day up until high school, this passion and zeal for photojournalism. Where does it come from, and how has it evolved and manifested through the years?
So it came from sort of a strange place. I think if you'd met me when I was in high school, you wouldn't have thought this was the course I was going to go down, I expect. But when I got to college, I entered my sort of little journalism life by answering an ad on Craigslist and other old-fashioned sentences. And the New York Sun, the then fledgling and now defunct, not my fault, New York Sun, had posted an ad up saying they're looking for a cub reporter. That's exactly how they phrased it. And I said, oh, that'll be interesting. That sounds like a fun, old-fashioned, even at the time kind of thing. And so I went down and interviewed with them, and they said, do you want to be a writer or do you want to be a photographer? And I thought it'd be interesting to go take pictures. This was a week before 9/11. And it was a weird way to start in the sort of the journalism world. I started as the most unimportant peon in the New York journalism community, like I think a lot of folks kind of do. And I fell in love with it very quickly, but not for the reason that most folks, I think, do. Most folks get into what we call image making or visual storytelling because they like making pictures. I certainly do. That's not the reason why I'm there. I have always been really attracted to the fact that it's a gateway to meeting absolutely everybody. You get to meet every kind of person from every kind of background with every kind of story, and everybody you meet has something to teach you. And I've gotten to sit down with people who are politicians, who are celebrities, who are Holocaust survivors. I'm doing a project right now that has me spending a lot of time in really remote parts of the country. I spend a lot of time working with Native American folks, people who I wouldn't necessarily have that much opportunity to be hanging out with, but I get to meet them and I get to learn from them. I get to engage with them. You know this. You run a podcast. When you scratch people, everybody gets really interesting really fast, and the enrichment that it gives to my life, the greed that I have for sort of this experiential learning is really really deep. I started as a photojournalist and I dropped it because it's an incredibly hard career to keep. I ended up going and becoming an executive for a few years. I worked for a man I loved deeply, who taught me a lot, and I ended up working for a couple companies, ended up with the Daily Mail Group, then left the Daily Mail Group and ended up working as an executive at a private jet company, and came back to doing this. Took a 95% pay cut to do it. The thing that I missed was fundamentally the being out there, the getting to talk to people. You know, there's an aspect of that if you're sort of in a sales-based organization or whatnot, where you get to meet people. That's a very different engagement. That's a very different relationship. What I get now is I get to, while suffering the endless pain of being the product, I get to also go and meet people and engage in something that's really sort of socially and spiritually fulfilling, and that's what keeps me going. So I don't know that I can call myself, to get back to your question of how I got started in photojournalism, I don't know that I can call myself a photojournalist fairly anymore. I still have a press card. I spent most of the pandemic working for Getty. Certainly, if someone calls me that, they're not wrong, but I'm something different now, and I don't exactly know how to define what it is. The way I usually describe it is the way that I think would be very appealing to a worthy for 30 audience. I try and tell stories that make the world a little smaller.
Trying to tell stories that make the world a little smaller. No, that's tremendous. You know, what I try to aspire is to do is bring on people like yourself, BA, which is how do we make the world around us just a little bit more familiar? And I think that's what you're doing, you know, through that experience, through sitting down with different groups and really getting to understand the humanity. You know, as I was preparing for our conversation today and looking at your projects, both from the exhibitions, the books, photo capture, there's that humanity element that is the common denominator that I've uncovered is, you know, for instance, like the poets that you profiled in Children of Grass. You know, one of the interviews that you gave is like, I didn't know that they were so humorous and humorous and had this gregarious nature about them. I thought, you know, there was, you know, there, and again, I'm not quoting you, but I'm just from what my interpretation is, they sit behind a desk, and when something comes to them, they put it on paper and they put it out there. No, you really understood who these people are and were. Which I think is incredible to your point about the humanity.
People almost always defy their stereotypes. You know, when I started Children of Grass, I expected it to be a bunch of sort of lofty academics who were highly engaged with ponderous processes. And in reality, it was a bunch of people who like to have fun, really have experiential lives. Working with survivors, when I started doing the Invited to Life project, I started something very different than what it turned into, but you certainly have this image that's portrayed of what Holocaust survivors look like. There's certainly popular images of the stereotype of Jews. Not all the survivors are photographed are Jews, but most are, and what that looks like. And in reality, it doesn't really match the experience. All of my poets, and I have an obnoxious habit of calling them my poets and my survivors. All of my poets, you know, they weren't necessarily people who were sitting around just smoking pipes and wearing tweed and thinking about the deep thoughts all day long. And most of my survivors are not sad. Survivors are always portrayed as being these victimized, pathetic people, and they're really, really, truly, I can't express it strongly enough, they're not that. I've done other projects. I have a project called Elsewhere that no one cares about that I love, which is about sort of America's overlooked quarters. And people expect a certain thing, for instance, of the poor in America, which isn't exactly accurate. People have a certain thing they expect of the wealthy in America, which isn't exactly accurate. Everybody's complex. Everybody kinds of defies the box you want to put them into.
Right, and it's up to, and what your objective is how do you frame, and you thought before, I published this piece of work, that this person fell into that box, but actually they don't. It's a bit more sophisticated, it's a bit more nuanced. Going back to the Holocaust survivors, the poets. I do actually want to talk about elsewhere, because it's very interesting in the sense that, again, you're capturing America, and marginalized America, potentially
Mm-hmm.
neglected America,
Mm-hmm.
people and places that you don't normally think. Again, I try not to be this, a former, New York resident who thinks that the United States is New York, a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
Chicago, and then LA, and everything else in between is just flyover. No, there's America is vibrant. It's the diversity. It's the melting pot. That
Mm-hmm.
that we talked about, growing up, is that, the reason why, people came from the old country, like for me, for my family, we
Mm-hmm.
came from with present day Belarus.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the thought of, getting on the ship and going through Ellis Island, and the streets of New York are painted gold, but again, it's more than that. It's the land of opportunity. And when they were when my ancestors, again, I'm thinking that I was there on the boat, but when they were coming to America, they weren't thinking that New York is a land of opportunity. America is a land of opportunity. America is this exceptionalism that it provides. So I'd love for you to talk about elsewhere, and why it means so much to you, and for the audience.
Yeah, so I mean, so fundamentally, I was just googling. I can't remember who it was, but there's an old writer who commented that we were told that when we got to America, the streets would be paved with gold. When we showed up, we found they weren't paved at all, and in fact, we were expected to pave them. There's I can't remember who said the quote, and I just couldn't find it in 5 seconds while you were chatting. There's a strange aspect to it, only because Elsewhere is probably my most beloved project, and nobody cares about it at all. It comes out of this thing that I feel very strongly. I have a very, very deep love of America and the American experience and the American opportunity, but I always have to clarify that, especially because we live in sort of troubling and troubled times. My love of America is sort of the love of a good spouse. I see its defects. I want to improve it. I hope it
Mm-hmm.
sees the defects in me and wants to improve me. It should be the love of a spouse, not the love of, the way you love your ex-girlfriend who seems perfect in hindsight. She wasn't. There's 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 a reality to that. I travel for a living. I travel constantly. I travel everywhere. And uh, when you go into America, it is challenging it's impossible actually to avoid some of the warts of it. It's a big, complex society. Aaron Sorkin wrote in The American President 25 years ago that America's advanced citizenship, and that's true. And Elsewhere gives me an ability to do something I love to do with every single one of my projects, which is tell you I'm telling one story and actually tell you another. And Elsewhere ostensibly looks like, oh, BA is running around and taking pictures of airplanes. Isn't that cute? And then you read the narrative of it and understand, oh, there's actually something else going on there. And it came out of this very real, ingrained thing for me. And I'm going to spoil for your listeners something about you and I that we have in common.
Mm-hmm.
Eric grew up about 3 blocks away from me. And we both grew up under the landing pattern for John F. Kennedy Airport. And constantly, there was just this constant din of airplanes landing over us. And it never got tired for me. My father worked at the airport, and we'd go out on Saturday mornings and listen to the Concorde take off. And there's a miracle of flight. There's a miracle in America that people can always be reinventing themselves. Fundamentally, I can get up tomorrow, move to Los Angeles, change my job, change my name, declare myself a different gender, and society is not really going to blink at that. And that's something that's actually very uniquely American. If you are, great grandpa Tash in Belarus, you don't have that opportunity. If you're my cousins who live in Europe now, you don't have that opportunity. In America, we've always had that. Americans have always been mobile since the beginning. If you're talking about the colonizers, if you're talking about the people who lived here for 40,000 years before the colonizers,
Mm-hmm.
it has always been a mobile society and a mobile culture. But fundamentally, while everyone else is moving around and chasing opportunity or being chased by opportunity or being chased by the law or anything else, there's always folks who are left behind. There's always folks those opportunities leave behind. And Elsewhere is sort of a visual way of showing that.
Right. No, it's great. So, in terms of folks who want to learn more about Elsewhere, where can they go to
My
learn
website,
more?
my website's the best thing for anything really. I keep it updated fairly regularly. It's bavancize.com.
Yeah, fantastic.
Elsewhere shows in little dribs and drabs here and there. There occasionally some museum somewhere will pick up a picture of it here and there. There's a picture a lot of museums seem to like. There's a flight taking off over actually kind of not far from where we grew up in the very 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 eastern corner of Queens, of a plane going to South Korea or something. Huge, big ship taking off. But that's the best place to find anything. So generally speaking, so
Okay. All right.
yeah.
bavancice.com, and I'll include that in the show notes. And just I'm moving a little bit along, and I definitely want to get to Invited to Life. BA's latest project, latest book, which is coming out tomorrow, is right before we started to record, I brought up this point of Marshall Karp, this advertising executive who wrote this huge Quora response in terms of like what he learned and his inflection point in life. And he's 39. He was at that point in his life. He was 39. He reached the peak of his career at an advertising agency. Had the dog, the kids, the family, the summer house, all the accoutrements of a life well lived. And what he said to himself is this all it? Is this all, what life is supposed to be? And he was looking for more meaning, and he figured out a way to parlay his advertising experience into becoming a television writer and pitching
Mm-hmm.
his ideas to the networks.
Yep.
Did you have something similar? Again, as you evolved your career, did you reach an inflection point again? You're talking about these projects which have this commonality about humanity, about
Mm-hmm.
the really to getting to know your subjects and why it's important for the viewer or the person who's reading to really understand the importance of why you're taking the time to meet with these people.
So if you're talking about Worthy for 30 and what the kind of folks you so often bring on this podcast, you
Mm-hmm.
know, nobody's just one thing, right? You can be a business person and you can also be a philanthropist. You can be engaging in the capitalist society that we live in while also finding ways to give back to the larger society we live in as people. I had this, I think, kind of unique in the arts experience of giving it up. I about 2007 or so, after about 6 years in photojournalism, I essentially quit. And it was too hard. I was making terrible money. I went into being essentially a junior corporate executive and then a senior corporate executive, and whatever skills and abilities and talents I had, I was doing exceptionally well. I ended up a vice president in a private jet company. I was doing really, really well financially. And I
Gotcha.
had a girlfriend at the time who, she's a wonderful woman. It didn't work out. Sometimes that happens. And she impressed upon me that I was making a giant raft of money and I was miserable. And she said, I really, really think you need to quit and give all of that up. And I haven't seen her in 6 or 7 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
She was her own life. I occasionally check in with her. I talked to her actually a couple weeks ago. But I will be indebted to her for the rest of my life. Absolutely and positively. She told me you need to quit. And I gave up a extremely robust salary to go to shooting a few weddings, freelancing for the Daily News, then for the Village Voice, etc., doing things that I found culturally and spiritually fulfilling to sort of my sense of humanism, starting to make my own projects. But a thing had happened while I was gone, while I was away from the farm, going off and being a business person. I learned business. I learned business skills. I learned sales skills. I learned how to craft a project, how to convince somebody something is meaningful. I learned the value of an elevator pitch. I learned how you can do work that is meaningful, and also not starve to death doing it. And that's something that's probably kind of unique. All the products I've done have always been essentially self-funded. I've been exploring recently different ways to do other things, but fundamentally I've used A to move on to B and B to move on to C. But fundamentally, you can learn skills along the way, and it's not bad to be a business person and also try and engage in your larger society.
Right, right. It's you identify the passion that that former girlfriend helped you, held a mirror up is like, yeah, you're making a lot of money, but again, you're miserable. There's something missing. Going back to that love of photography and photojournalism, and evolving that into wedding photography, and then wedding photography and some general assignments. Then that parlays into exhibitions, other projects that become exhibitions, other projects become exhibitions that become books. So it's really really what it sounds like is having this self belief. It's so funny. It's like we get to a certain point in life where it's like, am I ready? And can I do this? And I think what
You're
you've
never
proven.
ready. You're never ready. That's the thing
Never
about
ready.
it. So the thing about you said you'd had a guest on. Correct me if I have the story wrong, but he had quit his big career and he went into television writing, as you said, correct?
Yes, not a
Yeah.
former guest, but a Quora
All right. Yes. Yes. Yes.
question,
Sorry.
yeah,
Okay.
a response. Yes,
So that person, right?
right.
He had choices he made. He wanted to give it up. He wanted to write.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's great. But he could have been writing sonnets. He didn't. He picked something where he would still be creatively engaged, but also not starve his family. Television writers do very well. He
Right.
picked something where he knew that would be sustaining. When I jumped ship from being a loathsome business person, I went I went into initially photographing weddings because they're a way to monetize photography. Now it turned out that I deeply, deeply love shooting weddings in a way that very few, maybe no photographers really actually ever do. I truly love it. That's unusual, but also fundamentally, that's not where I started with it. I started with it because I needed to, not starve to death. And I could have said, well, I want to go and make pictures of this thing or that thing and hope for the best. But
Hmm.
fundamentally, anything is hoping for the best. I shot weddings and then started shooting assignments and then started shooting these projects, you know, basically being Tarzan and swinging from vine to vine, hoping the next vine will be right behind it, right? And that is a fundamental business skill. You will never meet a successful business person at really any level who doesn't have a story of, well, I had this other idea and it failed. I was working at this place and I was fired. I was going to college and then I quit. There has to be a root and an element of failure and the absolute ability to be willing to accept that you could be ruined at any given moment. You asked about Elsewhere before. I have worked on Elsewhere on and off for about 4 or 5 years. I doubt I've made a penny off of it. I don't think that I have. I love it and I do it, and I do other things that sometimes work out and sometimes don't. I broke even on Children of the Grass. I am slightly in the black on Invited to Life, but fundamentally, those things change over time, and you go into it because it's important to you, because you think it's something that can work, and you hope for the best, and you hope to try and find that way to state the value to others. Everybody who's going to be talking about billionaires these days can talk about the fundamental model of Amazon or Netflix. It's probably two of the biggest businesses in the United States right now. Netflix started with some guy having an idea and saying, I want to send people dirty DVDs to their house. And I think it's really going to work out. And everyone said, no, you're stupid. But he believed in it. And Amazon starts with the stable story of a guy saying, well, maybe I'm just going to try and start selling stuff online. Nobody's going to buy stuff online. There's no trust mechanism there. You go to the shop, you can see it in your hand, and you can buy that thing.
Tactile. Right.
No, it's tactile. I can feel a thing. And in 1995 or whatever, nobody's going to trust that. He said, no. I think that might work out. And so, fundamentally, all of these things start with somebody saying, I've got an idea, I'm just going to run headlong into it, like the Kool-Aid man going through a brick wall, hoping that on the other side of it there's not another brick wall, you know?
Right. It's having yes, you're never going to be ready, but you have that belief. You have that fundamental belief that it's going to work just based on all the steps that you're taking, and there's some diversification in some of the steps to get to your end goal. Taking these little jobs that can pay the bills and the overhead, but I could also fuel the ultimate prize, which is again focusing head on some of these very important projects to you, like Elsewhere, Children of Grass, and Invited to Life.
Eric, every single one of my projects, every single one has started with somebody saying, BA, this is stupid and it's not going to work. Every single one of them. They've occasionally been right. Absolutely true. They've occasionally been right. But occasionally they've been wrong. I've got to have big exhibitions and I get to have big books and there's big names involved and et cetera. And, the ability to just do that and run into that is crucial in business. It's absolutely, truly crucial in the arts, which is, a big part of the idea of the starving artist. Me and Jeff Bezos were never going to belong to the same country club, but I'm not exactly a starving artist either. And the reason for that is that most artists don't trouble themselves with learning business skills. I believe very strongly that all art schools in this country should also force business education, which most people don't come out with. Most people come out and say, well, I'm going to make a painting or I'm going to write a play and I just hope for the best. And that's not a business. That's a hobby. It doesn't need to be, but that's what it ends up being. And so, there's no reason, again, coming back to this, there's no reason why it can't be both. People can't be complex and do all these things.
Right, and I think you articulated the premise of the show, which is, speaking with people who are doing good while doing well. You can do both at the same time, finding purpose and profit. To your point, there's nothing wrong with, yes, pursuing your art, but it's also key and necessary if you want that to turn into a business, to have those skills in order to make it, from hobby to an actual sustainable business to maintain a living.
There's a cultural perception, I think, and this is key, that we tend to, how to phrase this, we tend to judge people for being comfortable, especially in our social media age. We want people to do okay but not well, and certainly not better than us. That's important. And there's an ingrained sort of keeping up with the Joneses ugliness thing that we have as a society. In the arts, you face this extremely common problem where you are expected to be impoverished and struggling and unhappy if you're an artist. And all artists are fundamentally deeply depressed at whatever their level of success. Hi, how are you? But there's also this absolutely important reality that there's no reason why it has to be that. Yes, the challenge spurs on the art. That's absolutely true. I hate all of my work, all of it. That's very common, very natural. So, every artist you meet with any sort of success will tell you that they hate their work. That's an important thing to keep you spurred on. But you also have a responsibility to yourself to not engage in the suffering that people expect of you either. Now, I was awarded a grant. The first grant I'd ever actually won not long ago. The state of New York gave me a grant for the project I'm currently working on, which certainly felt nice. And then I got a letter from them saying, by the way, congratulations on this. Not actually a ton of money we're going to give you. It's a requirement that you spend every single penny of this money. You cannot keep any for yourself. You have to spend it all on the project. You can't keep anything, which is a really interesting concept, especially from a grant making organization. Hey, we're going to give you this money because we think the work is important, but also we do need you to suffer a little bit so we feel better about it. Fundamentally, there's the idea of, you can go to your local McDonald's. I don't recommend this because you'll die of heart attacks, but you can go to your local McDonald's, and part of the covenant is you don't really want to think about the fact that the guy who owns your McDonald's is a multimillionaire, that little franchise guy, because he owns 5 franchises. and his social media probably doesn't show him playing golf on a Wednesday, you know, because people in that position understand that being relatable, being likable is really key, and part of that is not being seen as successful. We talk about this a lot with philanthropy. Talk about this a lot with billionaires. Billionaires are sort of the ultimate them in America now, and I'm not a billionaire,
Right.
not likely to be a billionaire. Uh, do I don't necessarily think that there's any way that I or you or most anybody can relate to the idea of being a billionaire, what that feels like. But also, part of what happens in these conversations about billionaires revolves around, well, how do they spend their money, and is it appropriate for someone to have money? Is it appropriate for someone to be successful? And that's the same conversation that you have in the arts, just scaled way up, right? Sure, the guy who thought of, hey, we'll send dirty DVDs, I guess he should get to have something, but should he get to be a billionaire? Well, academically, we might say yes, but the part of us that grew up on playgrounds maybe doesn't. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. Is that it's that relatability component. You know, do we want to see people more successful than we do? You know, we can have a whole conversation. You know, you turn on. I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but I am. You turn on Bravo. A lot of that programming is, you know, talking about millionaires and billionaires in the United States, and what Andy Cohen has done exquisitely well is that the viewers want to understand and want to see and want to be entertained by the millionaire lifestyle because it's an aspiration. And but again, if go ahead.
America's a nation of 370 million temporarily embarrassed millionaires. Everybody thinks that they're one good idea away from that. And so that's why we can allow ourselves to be entertained by them. We also have a tendency, again, to them. They're allowed to entertain us because they get turned from being people into being a product.
Right. But once, to your point, once they become that person again, is like, let's vilify them. Let's them. Let's,
Yeah.
you know, I don't want to see, you know, I don't want them to be them to be more successful or be perceived as more successful than me, which is, again, it's a major contradiction. But moving along, you know,
Yeah.
Invited to Life.
Good luck keeping it to 35 minutes, my friend.
Yes, good
Yeah.
luck. I know,
Good luck, yeah.
exactly. We're catching up here. You know, I would be remiss to not mention, you know, when I said, you know, B.A. Van Sice to my parents is coming on the show, the cavelling, look what the work that he's doing, you know, for the Jewish community, bringing, you know, incredible awareness. Again, it should not be understated. I, for one, you know, again, as I mentioned early on in the conversation, my family came to the United States, you know, in the early-ish 20th century, you know, fleeing the pogroms in modern day Russia and Belarus. So I went to Hebrew school. I understand the Holocaust. I understand it's incredibly important for us to remember the Holocaust so it doesn't happen again.
Mm-hmm.
It's an incredible lesson. And to your point, you know, the temperature in the United States has been turned up.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and more importantly, and more specifically, you know, the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States. You know, you and I have spoken about this separately. Is an issue that we need to address head on. I think the New York Post stated that 60% of hate crime incidents in New York City has been caused by anti-Jew hatred and rhetoric. So.
Yeah.
All that's to say, you know, this project, this book, the exhibition, again, it's incredibly important for us to discuss because, again, this generation is what you're doing as a storyteller, is to make sure that the stories are the lessons that we're trying. And before I again, that as you said, you know, there's a perception that Holocaust survivors of the United States is evil, not all with it, you know, they're sedentary, you know, just waiting the days out until, unfortunately, until they pass away. But based on what I've been reading about Invited to Life and again, the exhibition, which I'd love for you to talk about, what have you, again, I'd love to learn the lessons that you were taught and that you are wanting to make sure is conveyed to the audience and to the readers?
So the first thing about it is Invited to Life didn't actually necessarily start as a Holocaust story, which is the funny thing about it that kind of usually surprises people. I started in 2015. I was working at the Village Voice, and I had wanted to do like a dozen portraits because at the time in late 2015 there was a man running for president who was talking a lot about refugees. He was talking a lot about how Mexicans aren't sending their best people, how we need to build a wall to keep us free, etc. And I wanted to do a small sort of feature piece talking about what it looks like when you have refugees come to America, and what the sum of their lives look like. I, as you know, come from a deeply immigrant family, and I say it as if immigrant is a binary or non-binary thing. But yeah, coming from that background, I have a very strong feeling about immigrants and refugees. And originally, I had thought about doing something about the Cuban refugees who come over after '59, after Castro took power. And I realized that they weren't quite advanced in their age and enough for me to be able to talk about their lives as fully as I wanted to. And then I realized, oh, Bagora, there's a whole group of people who came in between 1945 and 1950 this country as refugees, and particularly other refugees, not being in a minority religion, not speaking the language, being sort of outcast in the communities they come from as well as the ones they were coming to. And I wanted to explore that. So I reached out to the Museum of Jewish Heritage here in New York, and I said I wanted to try and find some survivors. I said I wanted to find a dozen. And pretty quickly, I had photographed 37. And I realized that it happened because I wasn't telling stories necessarily about the Holocaust. And I wasn't necessarily telling stories about people of the Jewish faith or background. Most of these survivors are Jewish, not all of them are. But what I realized was I was telling stories about American experience, and I was telling stories about trauma processing. I came to realize immediately, I'm going to sidetrack here a second, about a year ago, I was on a call, a video call with the woman who runs March of the Living. For those of your callers who don't know what March of the Living is, every year they get a number of Holocaust survivors and their families. They go to Krakow, they do essentially a march for recognition and remembrance. And the woman who was running this, she was asking me how I got into this. I've since learned differently, but I at the time I did not know that I had any close enough connection to the Holocaust. So how'd you get into this? And I said, well, I sat down to meet about a dozen survivors, and she stopped me and she said, and let me guess, you fell in love. And I said, yes, that's exactly what happened. I am deeply inspired by these people, deeply, who came to this country not necessarily wanted, if we're honest about it. Came here as refugees, not speaking the language. Most of them had literally been slaves in camps in Europe, and come here and say, well, a piece of this is for me too. And almost all of them were faced with a similar choice, especially the ones who were Jewish. I can go to either Israel or the United States. I can go to Israel, where I'll be like everybody else, or I can go to the United States, which is advanced citizenship, but presents a chance for opportunity, perhaps a chance for ambition, perhaps a chance to start completely anew. And they get sent to every corner of this country. They get sent to Pittsburgh, they get sent to Ohio and California and Florida. There's a guy in Oklahoma, there's people in Texas, absolutely everywhere you can imagine they get sent to places where they're extremely other. And they takes the word, a piece of America for themselves. And there's something that's deeply incredible and deeply inspiring in that. But here's the thing. Here's the real thing for me. They are, and I am unambiguous in this, the most joyous people you will ever meet. I have met 140 Holocaust survivors. I'm willing to bet that there's probably nobody alive in the States right now who knows personally more survivors than I do. And when I say no, we hang out. saw 5 of them last week. I went to dinner with one of them who, like me, has received hate mail because it's invited to life. And, I have seen what these folks can do and how they've overcome. And I've also learned something from what they've taught me about your specific question, which I have not forgotten. You're talking about the rise in social anti-Semitism in America right now. I get lots of weird mail that has been increasingly ramping up. And when it gets to me, B.A. Van Size, gadding around, having a good time, wearing silly hats, making art, it's really kind of filtered down to a really kind of weird level. There was a whole big thread on, and I won't name it, but one of the neo-Nazi websites. Somehow or other, I don't understand how this happened, but one of the neo-Nazis went to the exhibition I did at the Center for Jewish History this last spring. I don't know how they showed up. I don't know how they got in. I don't know what happened. I don't know what they saw. I don't understand. They got real riled up at it, and they started a thread on this neo-Nazi website. Hey, this product was made by B.A. Van Size. He's a race traitor. And then they start stalking through my Facebook and looking at my private life and said, but wait, he looks a certain kind of way. Maybe he's not a race traitor. Maybe he's just this thing or that thing. And there's this big, really active conversation among neo-Nazis about me. And again, for those of you who are just tuning in now somehow, Eric's known me for 30 years. In addition to being a gadfly artist, it's really weird to me because I'm just Gordon and Sarah's boy from Baldwin. So it's a weird vibe for me. And so it's a weird thing to start getting this kind of mail and whatnot. And I start getting people calling the house and all sorts of stuff. And the thing that gets me through it is this. I know 140 Holocaust survivors who've had it worse than anybody you've ever met. And every one of them can tell you can get through it. And you can move forward and you can start again. And whatever it is that's tough in your life, you can keep on moving. And these people have had, for the most part, really happy and inspiring lives, inspired of the fact that their foundation to life was someone trying to kill them or someone enslaving them. And they came to a country that maybe didn't want them, where they had a hard time adapting. Almost all of them had to restart their lives as absolute and total wrecks. There's so many stories of, well, I got married after the war and that failed because I was, a rudderless monster. And it took me a while to find out who I was and how I could function in the world. But they still found a way. And to the folks right now who are troubled by the rise of anti-social Semitism, the rise of just sort of vitriolic rhetoric in general, my response to it is that the human will is an incredible thing. And people can surprise you and you can surprise yourself as well. And as long as you give yourself that opportunity and also the ability to step back, take a breath, realize where you are in the world, and realize that no matter where you have it now, you probably still have it better than most anybody who came before you and can still have it better in the future. The most of your history is always still in your future. That's been my personal big takeaway. I always find it interesting when talking about Invited to Life. You can tell who's maybe read the book, who hasn't, what they think about it based on whether they've seen it or not. There's the biggest message of it is sort of this message of inspiration that comes from these survivors. When I was doing the book, I did not have the crisis and battle of egos with the publisher that I thought might happen. We didn't have a lot to bicker over. They were surprised when I handed them 224 pages of text to what they thought was going to be a photo book, but they edited it without much complaint, and our only two real tough conversations came around to the cover and the title. I won on the cover and they won on the title. They wanted to add the words "Finding Hope." And I was pretty against it. It felt a little twee to me at the time. And not all of these survivors found hope. Many of them did. Most of them did. Almost all of them found a new future and a better life and things that were really worthwhile, but not all of them did. And the further I get into it, I think that they were right. As much as I fought them on the title, I think that they were right, because fundamentally, just surviving is a hopeful thing. Just finding your way is a hopeful thing. If I had gone through what most of these folks had gone through, I wouldn't be able to feed or bathe myself. who could possibly? But still, you can find a way. They did.
You can find a way, and it's an incredible perspective. As you said, what they experience is unspeakable. There's no comparison
Nothing.
on what these survivors had gone through
Well,
when they were,
there is though. I had a Holocaust survivor out in California who emailed me. It's actually been fun because the survivor's been getting the book now, and he took a little umbrage at something I wrote about him in my essay about him in the book. It's a very positive thing, but it's an honest thing. He's kind of a nervous guy, and talked about that a little bit. But he pointed out to me he was in one Holocaust, and there's a Holocaust every day. There's always something going on. There's challenges everywhere all the time. You know, within our own lives, how many wars and genocides and famines have happened? How many folks still live in slavery today? While you and I are sitting here in our homes and having this chat on a podcast with our internet and going to have nice meals and families tonight or whatever. But fundamentally,
Sure.
These are all challenges that we know we can't comprehend, but yet people got through them.
People got through them. No, it's also a great perspective. Again, just reeling it back to again present day. There's still strife. There's still problems. There's still, as you said, famine, genocide around the world. And again, and we shouldn't ignore it. We shouldn't neglect it. Everyone should at least have the opportunity to find the life that they want to live, and how they want to lead it. Where I want to, again, I love this conversation, but where I want to end this conversation is there's humanity. But before the humanity, there's that tactile, experiential narrative. A little Hunter S. Thompson-ish, where you're leading the person down
Mm-hmm.
that path of discovering what you're seeing from your perspective,
Mm-hmm.
how this person is unique, how this person is just like us. Again, it's like making this world a little bit smaller. Which is incredible. Again, being this narrator, there's that humanity aspect. Again, how are we all? Again, when we scratch the surface, on the face of it, when we scratch the surface, we're more similar than we are different. I'll put this in the show notes. Absolutely, the show notes. And also
Monday.
The Strand event, the event at the Strand Bookstore by Union Square, where you can meet BA as he talks about
and two of the survivors, two Auschwitz survivors are going to be joining me, which is the thing I'm really excited about. The Strand said you can do whatever you want, you can do whatever you want, and I said okay, well that's intimidating. I wanted the audience to have the chance to experience what I had, so I have two Auschwitz survivors whose lives have an interesting connection to one another, but became very, very different. And so they're going to be joining me on the stage. We're going to talk about the process of telling their stories, how lives look different after trauma, etc. So that's going to be Monday.
So Monday. So I'll include a link to find out more about again the BA's event at the Strand Bookstore. But the other thing that I want to pull out of this conversation, again, the commonality, the humanity. We're more similar than we are different.
Mm-hmm.
The narrative, of course, the resilience, the resolve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To your point, again, speaking about you, BA, about finding your path, it's that belief, that resilience. Not everyone's life is linear and sequential. There's zigzags as we go through life. Yeah, and again, we're not different. The listeners aren't different. I imagine there are foibles and successes along the way, but again, it's that resolve. And that resolve that gets infused into the story that you're telling. I imagine, some of the poets, that you profiled in Children of Grass had interesting sort of backgrounds and stories of how they eventually got to where they got to tell that story. So, I think, as I try to find the commonality between my guests and their stories that they tell, it's yes. BA is definitely that person who, again, lives and operates at that nexus of purpose, of professionalism, of not making a living. Again, it's we're not demonizing. Yes, you can be professionally ambitious, but never lose sight of your core fundamental values, which I think you've been very effusive both here in this conversation, but also in the work that you do. So
Thank you.
I really do appreciate your time, BA. Before we wrap up, is there any other parting words that you'd like to get across to the listeners, whether it's Invited to Life or any of the other projects that you're working on?
Yeah, actually, I do. While I was sitting here chatting, I've actually been thinking about sort of the role of you and I sitting here on a podcast, and talking about how different lives that people live. And I think the reality is anybody who is listening to your podcast is somebody who fundamentally wants to be a leader. And anybody who is appearing on your podcast is somebody who has some sort of public facing role. I wouldn't necessarily call myself a leader, but I certainly have a public facing role.
Mm-hmm.
And
sure.
There is a responsibility there, whether you're in business or in the arts or anything else. You do have a responsibility in that leadership, in that sense of creation, whether that's the creation of art or capital or anything else, to come back to what I was talking about before, about the idea of making humanity a little smaller. Fundamentally, everybody's different, yeah, but everybody's not that different. And if you are given that opportunity, you really, truly need to find a way to use that podium, use that forum, use that exhibition, use that book to try and bring people a little closer, especially because we're living in a divisive time, wildly, perhaps unnecessarily divisive time. That if you have that opportunity, the world's a small place, and you can use it to show that and to make that a more obvious reality. So I like that. With Worthy 30, the people you bring on are folks who understand that and want to do that. You can do well, but you should also make sure to do good.
You can do well, but you make sure to always do good. Yeah, or to find a way to do good. Again, it's not. I'm not again. Yes, and in natural fashion, which I think is a good human, as a mensch. If you again one more Yiddish word before we wrap up.
You do love a good Yiddish word, don't you?
I try to.
Yeah.
I try to have a good Yiddish word, but as I said, I appreciate the time, the insights, the perspective. I definitely feel a lot more grounded. I imagine the listeners do too, listening to all the work and the experiences that you've had. And as I mentioned, I'll put your website, where to find Invited to Life, the Strand Bookstore event. And reach out to BA. Follow BA on social media.
I'm very easy to find. I like everybody.
He likes everybody. See, look at that. So, BA, thank you for your time this afternoon, and we'll hear from you soon.
Thank you so much, Eric. I'm so glad to catch up.